Well, hello, I'm Quigs, and this is Micah. He looks a little different from last time you saw him. And today we are going to tonight maybe I should say, we are going to talk about our trip and some of the questions that I saw in the comments.
All right.
Arf, 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 arf.
Oh, you can hear my dogs barking through here. That's nice.
That's fine, it'll add some charm. Well, Micah, how do you feel after now 4 months? No, 4 or 5 months? I think it's 5 months since we started the trip. How are you feeling?
Less homesick. I do miss being up there. It was really fun. The nature, the emptiness, the newness of it all. But it's nice to have all the comforts of home back too.
What was your favorite part of the trip? Or let me rephrase that. What were your top 3 favorite parts of the trip? Whether that was temporal or geographical or interpersonal.
I really liked just the experience of being up there where there was no night. It was kind of mind-warping. Having the sun did set, but there was never really a night. It was just kind of like sunset, twilight time. When we got back to where there was night, it felt weird. Getting away from everything, hanging out with you, it was fun. Reconnecting.
Was there any particular geographical part of the trip that really blew you away, that you weren't expecting to be as impressed by or captured in awe by?
I really liked Muncho Lake and Carcross. I feel like those are the places that are most imprinted into my memory geographically. The images of them. The lake's near Carcross there too. I can't remember what that lake's called now, but right before Carcross. And yeah, they were just stunningly beautiful, and kind of Carcross, at least not what you'd expect to find in the Arctic, but just being able to be in sand dunes, looking over a lake with glaciers in the distance is pretty incredible.
The most awestruck moment for me was at some point, I think after we had passed Tombstone National Park, and the geography stopped being these fairly pointy mountains, and then just kind of we went through more of a rolling mountain area, but you could still see mountains on the sides, both sides of us, and just the complete absence of trees, and it just felt very very unique. I've seen people go to Iceland and take videos and pictures of Iceland, and geographically it looks very similar, but Iceland has all that fresh, new volcanic geography, even though the grass, the fauna, or whatever, the flora, are all very similar. And there's just this old feeling to the mountains there that just really, really struck me, especially when the fog would roll in. And I've got a picture of you taking a picture, looking over a valley, and it's just completely wrapped in fog, and just this tiny little red dot in a sea of green and with mist, and it's one of my favorite photos from the whole trip. And that moment just really stuck with me. Of just we're up high on this hill, and you can kind of see where we're mountaintop, I guess technically, and you can kind of see where we're going to drive down into as we descend. That was one of my favorite areas.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of eerie up there, just because it's so empty, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no people, except for those also traveling on the road, but there's not much. There was no tall vegetation, no wildlife we really saw up there. It was so quiet and empty, and just completely anywhere I've ever been.
Yeah, the quietness also kind of got to me in a good way, where I'm just so used to hearing insects and just noise, activity, life, and there were just many places where I didn't hear even a mosquito, buzzing around. It was just pure silence. And then when it wasn't windy, then you had also the silence of just the lack of hearing of any movement at all, and you're just staring at this vast empty not in a bad way, wasteland, but like it just kind of looked like there was nothing there, and like
Just untouched.
exactly.
But like not just by humans, but
Right.
untouched by by anything.
Yeah.
Um,
Then at the same time, if you like actually like looked around and like spent some time in that area, like you could start to see the life appear. Not necessarily in the sense of like animals per se, although I'm sure we could have spot more like small critters and stuff if we hadn't scared them off. You'd think driving an EV in along the Arctic would be kind of like the ultimate safari, because like it's so quiet, it shouldn't scare any of the animals, right? But unfortunately, other than that fox and the dog, we didn't really come across
one elk.
We saw the elk on the Dempster or along the regular highways.
That was on the way up to Dawson. We saw elk
Yeah,
and buffalo
yeah,
and bear.
yeah.
But yeah, on the
I was
Dempster-
referring to the Dempster. Yeah.
Okay, the Dempster, yeah, not. I'll blame all of the people, the loud people in cars that went in front of us, for everything. I'm still a little salty that I lugged my like 500mm lens from Guatemala all the way to the Arctic Ocean and saw very little wildlife, and then like half an hour later people were posting pictures with their iPhone of grizzlies and caribou and what have you, and it's like, really?
All right. So waste not, want not, 5953, and I will not be saying that full username probably again. Asks, did you have any issues with keeping a full-size spare tire on the Hitch cargo carrier for most of the trip? Would you do that differently next time? Given that you also helped disassemble everything that I put together, what would you say, since you were the one who took it off?
So we actually didn't have it on there for most of the trip. We only had it on there from Chicago to Edmonton and then back, right? And it definitely would have been a problem if we would have left it there. We'd need to get either a raised hitch carrier to keep the ground clearance more, which we were trying to do. Actually, I was trying to find one, and everything was out of stock from Chicago to Edmonton of the adapter to give us a couple inches of raise on the hitch carrier. So we just have to try and find a more appropriate hitch carrier. But yeah, it definitely would have been tricky to leave that on there the whole time. We were like almost bottoming out, coming in and out of parking lots. And so I would say if you're planning a similar trip and you're going to want to fit everything in the car, not really have a hitch carrier if you can, because it's a lot more convenient, a lot more efficient, easier, to less worry about bottoming out and stuff.
And even without the carrier, we still bottomed out getting off of the ferry on the McKenzie River.
And the other thing with the hitch carrier is, since it's behind the rear axle, it actually lifts the front of the car, and we had a lot less traction with it on, which wasn't a problem because it was all highway driving basically with the front. But when you were pulling out of somewhere, you could feel the lack of traction on the steering and driving wheels, which wouldn't have been ideal on a crazy mountain dirt road. Yes, yeah, for sure. And yeah, I would say if you're not as worried about efficiency as we were, putting a carrier on the roof rack or a small trailer behind would probably be a much more convenient, safer, easier, both easier to do and easier on your car option if you need more space. So the next question is from also Waste Not Want Not. How much did they charge you to use their welder outlet?
I think that was in reference to McPherson.
Yeah, Fort McPherson. And how much did they charge us to use the welder outlet?
I think it was
like
$40.
$50
That
Canadian?
was $40.
$40 Canadian.
Yeah.
$40 Canadian, which is the most expensive charge, I think, on our trip.
No.
But still, I mean, all things considered, no. Which one
Tuktoyaktuk was 70.
Was 70? Okay. But when you consider we'd have been putting at least that much gas in there if we had been in a combustion car. It was like order of magnitude, those two places more expensive than anywhere else, and still in the grand scheme of things, not that bad.
Yep. DL Horn asks, any issues with the windshield fogging up when not using climate control? The simple solution to that was to bundle up and crack the window like about an inch, just like 2 or 3 centimeters, and just, embrace the cold. Because we were going so slow, especially on the Dempster, because like we weren't going much faster than like 100 kilometers an hour even on the highway, so it's not like not that you want the windows cracked open at that speed, but when you're only going like 50 kilometers an hour, 30-ish miles per hour, and then you're stopping every couple of minutes to take pictures, having just like enough gap in the window for air to come in, and like basically the condensation from your breath not like sticking to the windshield and just kind of getting sucked out, did a lot to save the range, so we could run the heater when we were freezing, not run the heater in order to be able to see out the road or out the windshield.
There was really actually only 2 times where we couldn't use any climate control at all. The stretch between Dawson and Eagle Plains was the only time we like absolutely could not use the climate control. We tried to not use it while we could, just in case of something on some of the other stretches, but being able to stop and charge up in Fort McPherson really saved us and let us be a bit more comfortable, especially going through the mountains where it was snowing, which would have been terrible with no climate control at all. This is from Ron B. Did you offer to pay the folks that let you use their dryer plugs or 120 volt outlets along the way in the north?
Yes, although they wouldn't accept payment. I really had to do like the old handshake with the bill stuck in the hand. I did give, so the person who let us use their dryer outlet in Inuvik just wanted to kind of like pay it forward since people helped him, and so he wouldn't take money unless I said, well, if you don't need it, pass it on to someone who does. So I gave him 50 US, because still hadn't been to the bank at that point in Canada to get Canadian money. It was very American of me to just run around and throw my currency at people. But we were just like, go, that every time we were in town where there was a bank, it was closed because it was either a weekend or it was very bright out, but still 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning.
And I mean, what was the place with the cabins called that the Norwegian guy?
Yeah, Arctic Chalet.
They let us use their outlet too. We were staying there. I met him in the Eagle Plains Hotel, and he offered us to actually, he didn't even say if we stayed there we could charge our car there. He just said we could charge the car there. He would have taken our money if we had not also been guests there. Yeah. We would have given him something to charge there.
And then at Eagle Plains, it was the same story. Technically the Tesla charger that didn't work it's all coming from the same big diesel generator. That whole complex is like an off-grid complex, so the power comes from the same place. And when I talked to the hotel staff, the tire shop people were like, no, like don't, like this is all handled by the hotel, essentially. Like, go talk to them. And so when I talked to them, they're like, oh, but if you stayed at the campground or you stayed at the hotel, then it's included in the cost of your room and your lodging. So that's why we didn't pay them directly, which was nice because that was kind of a pricey hotel, but I still think given the location, it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, no, and like just it was so. I was out cooking in the campground because they didn't really have anything I could eat at the restaurant there. So I was making my gluten-free mac and cheese out in the campground, and it was cold and wet when we were there, and it would have been miserable to be in the tent. We would have been freezing just based off of, it was colder than the places we did tent camp. And we were freezing the places we tent camped.
Yes.
So it was worth staying in the hotel there 100%.
Rick asks, why didn't you use one of those aerodynamic roof storage bins? And I think he was talking about the carrier that you just alluded to. So yeah, same answer. It would have affected our range. We got between Dawson and Eagle Plains with almost nothing left, and that would have made it even more difficult, if not fully impossible, to do that trip in the Bolt. I think other cars like Teslas and stuff that are approaching that 300-mile range, like the super extended EVs, those could have probably easily done it with a roof carrier at a slower speeds. But the whole point of this trip was to use a standard range EV that was small and compact and didn't have a big extra battery or anything like that.
When you paid for charging via app or credit card, did you get charged a fee for currency exchange?
Well, you weren't paying for any of that, so I can answer the question. No,
Yeah.
because I used a US credit card that had no exchange fees.
Yes, I'd like the 2 times I paid for charging, I used a Canadian card, so I also did not pay any for
exchange fees. All right, Waste Not, back again with some more good questions. It sounds like you have an OBD2 dongle and app. Which one do you have, and what do you think about it? I used the VPeak OBD2 dongle. So the app I'm using was a Better Route Planner, and they list out a specific subset of OBD2 readers that they support, and so I bought the VPeak. I do not recommend the VPeak. It was the cheapest, but it is the least secure. So in theory, some of these Bluetooth readers, when they do the Bluetooth handshake with your phone, the only way that you can have another phone paired to it is if you physically press a button on the OBD2 reader. The VPeak doesn't have this. So essentially, like, anyone with a phone could walk past the car. The 12-volt battery is keeping the OBD2 dongle alive the whole time, and they could essentially like hijack our car if they knew like the right commands to send. And I believe the Bolt is decently hackable. Like, you could send it remote unlock commands if you could like mimic some stuff that cars are not very secure, and so that one's not recommended. But I was not too worried about people carjacking an EV in the middle of the Arctic with a Bluetooth reader, so I was okay leaving it plugged in while we were traveling and parking and everything.
Yeah, it honestly seemed pretty very safe up there. Small communities, everyone knows each other. But yeah, no, what I use is an OBD link. And those are the ones that you do have to push the button to. That's what I would recommend, is the OBD link adapters, and those you have to push the button to pair to your phone, and they go into sleep mode after no connection for several hours if they sense that the car is not running, so that they don't kill your battery, and they're not too outrageously priced. I definitely would recommend them.
Ziploc 2000, which is a great username. How did you manage to unclip the central seat belt in the back? That's in reference to when I took out the rear seats. I took out my socket wrench set, and I just found whichever socket worked. And because like when you flip the seats down, there are 2 anchor points for the seat belts, and I think it was like a 15mm socket. And just unscrewed that, and it came out pretty easily. The hardest part was removing the little bolster where the airbag is. So like when when you pull the seatbelt over, like the part where that connects into the pillar, there's a little bolster. That was incredibly hard to remove. I disconnected the battery just to make sure I didn't accidentally trigger the airbag, because that could have been bad. And then the other challenge in removing the seat, again, was not with the bolts for the seat belts, but it was actually getting that front seat, or sorry, the seat back to come out. So there was like a little, in the little hinge, there's a spring mechanism, and I didn't have any tools. I could like reach down in there and like push in the pin that attaches the seat back to the pillar. And so I was like just jamming a screwdriver in there, and you can see in episode 1 where I'm like struggling a little bit. I finally got that. If I had to like remove the seats a lot, I'm sure I'd tear something up doing that. But I will probably leave the seats out for most of this car's life, so it's not a big deal for me.
Hun the Hound says, what tires are you running?
So the factory, the Bolt from the factory has Michelin Green X or something like that. And they are really low rolling resistance tires, so they give you great range. They also have terrible traction. I have hydroplaned while traveling 40 miles per hour in the rain in summer, and I was like, this will not stand for an Arctic trip. And yeah, so I bought Goodyear electric drive 2s, and those allegedly have a 5 to 10% range hit, and I saw none of that. Like the efficiencies we were getting at highway speeds was 100% the same as what I was getting with the Michelin Green X or X Greens or whatever they were called. So highly recommend them. And there were some areas where, like with the slush and stuff on the top of that one pass that we went through. I don't know how it was for you because you drove most of that, but the few areas that I drove through that were super slushy, the car actually felt pretty good. Like one of my concerns with is if you read the online comments and stuff, people say like, oh, you need like mud tires and all this other stuff because like stuff gets caked in there. And I guess maybe if you are traveling like 50 miles an hour, 70, 80, 90 kilometers an hour off this dirt road, you probably do want mud tires so you can have good traction. But at the speeds we were going, it didn't feel too sketchy for the most part. I think you ran into a couple sketchy areas, but in general, that was not the tire's fault, I would say.
Joaquin Homan asks, could you share some information about your charging, such as statistics, time, kilowatts onboarded, SOC mileage, and kilowatts per mile?
Yes and no. So I was very focused on filming and trying to figure out where we were going to go next, because although I had planned out like, oh, we'll go here this day, here this day, here that day, some of the chargers we used were off-grid or free, which they didn't display very easily the full amount of kilowatts that it pumped into the battery. And we were just in a rush or whatever, and so I very frequently forgot to take like a picture with my phone of the charging station, or the station wouldn't report that, and so we would have had to gone to the battery and done some the car info screen. And the Bolt doesn't tell you; it always tells you the number of kilowatt hours until the most complete charge. So at one point we had I think 200 or 300 kilowatts of power that it had recognized had been added to the battery, because we'd never charged 100%. So I couldn't use the car to tell me between each stop. But the total number of kilowatt hours is here on the screen, and then the total cost for at least going up is here. The other challenge was, as we answered in previous questions, we just kind of plugged into some outlets and used an unknown amount of power and paid $40 for it or $70 for it. Or we flipped the breaker and the car stopped charging for 4 or 5 hours at one point, or 2 hours. It was a bit of a mess, keeping accurate, meticulous details.
That's right. And then I had to string a series of adapters together to trick the car into charging at 30 amps on a 40 amp outlet. I guess that would kind of be another downside of the very compressed timescale we did this in, is that there's a lot of stuff that would have been nice to have documented. Besides just that type of stuff, there's stuff that we would have liked to have gotten footage of, places we'd have liked to stop or spend more time that we didn't get to because there was just 2 of us. We were operating on not enough sleep, and we were on a very tight timetable, and a couple of times the weather was very much working against us, and that also caused us to change our plans. So it would be nice to have way more time if we ever did something like this again. At least way more extra time, so that when stuff comes up, it doesn't force us to compress everything later.
KWM Lin says, the police have a key to unlock the gate at the Hyundai dealership. Do you want to answer that one, since you interacted with the police the most?
As far as I know, all businesses that are open to the public have to have a lockbox with keys that are available to emergency services. It's probably over a certain size. There's probably some fine print in there, but basically, I think I was was my aunt who told us that we should call the police because they have to let them in because she's a paramedic.
It was the dealership, the other dealership
or was
next
it the
door.
dealership themselves? Okay.
So there, just for the audience's understanding, there were two dealerships. There was a Hyundai dealership and a Ford dealership. Everyone had left the Hyundai dealership at 9 p.m. and the Ford dealership still had people there. And so I walked in and asked them if they knew of anyone who worked at the other dealership, like a personal number, because we tried calling like the business number and it was all automated stuff. We couldn't get a hold of a person.
We actually got a hold of a couple people, but they were like, "Oh, I don't have anything to do with that," and we were like, "Could you call someone who did?" And they were like, they probably won't answer at this time. So anyhow,
and so at that point, after I explained basically the same thing Micah just said, the salespeople or whoever were still at the Ford dealership were like, "Oh, you should just call 911 then. Like, if you can't get a hold of anyone, get the fire department out here." So I called 911, and so the fire department, they sent the police. It took them like about an hour to show up. And then it took them almost 30 minutes on the phone with the emergency contact for the Hyundai dealership to get the correct code for the lockbox. So like the gate that you see her opening, the key to that gate is on a lockbox on that gate. Like, it's all right there. Easily accessible, but the information for the code to punch in the lockbox took about a half hour to get after she had arrived. Like, it was just pretty ridiculous.
It was a slightly weird combination lock also that I think they were unfamiliar with, the police officer, so it took them a while to get it open too, even once they got the right code. And it was interesting.
If there had been a fire, I think the fire department just would have like plowed through the gate and just broken it.
Well, the fire department, as far as I know, has the code and frequently open those locks and know how. So if the fire department showed up, I think they would have gotten us in like a minute. But it was a type of lock that the police were unfamiliar with opening because it's not, they don't in the course of their job usually, whereas like the firemen have to know how to open those because that's who they're there for, right? So I think that was the part of the problem there, is that it was just a very unfamiliar situation for everyone involved. Waste Not Want Not again says, did you charge the Jackery battery pack before you got on the Dempster Highway? If it were me and I ran out of charge with a few miles to go, I would have definitely charged with that instead of trying to find a tow truck. And that was the idea. That was the plan.
That's why we brought it.
That we would have that in case we were like five kilometers away from Eagle Plains or something like that, so that we wouldn't have to call a tow truck to pull us the last 5 kilometers. And we actually did even charge a little bit off of the Jackery battery station. We didn't end up needing it. It only gave us like 2 kilometers range in the time. But when we were stuck at Tombstone, we did plug the car into the Jackery. The downside of the Jackery is that you are charging at 120 volts at 12 amps. You add about a kilometer every, what was it, half an hour?
Something like that,
15 minutes? It's not a time efficient way to do it, and getting a battery pack or generator that can charge at 220 volts at a reasonable rate gets both cost prohibitive and big.
The idea was we still wanted to do like a pure, like on the car's own battery run if possible, but if we did run out, then we would have another 2 kilowatts minus 15% efficiency losses. I guess it'd be 30% because it's going DC to AC to then DC again. A lot of losses, but it still would have given us hopefully like another 10-ish kilometers, I think, which could have gotten us to Eagle Plains. The reason why we used it during our stop at Tombstone was, we're stuck there for a little bit, going to the bathroom. Micah went to ask to see if they had power, because allegedly, they have solar. It never hurts to ask. They said no. I wanted to make sure it actually worked. Like, the last time I'd used it to charge the car was as a test here in Michigan, and so I went in and plugged it in while he was asking, and we got that 2 kilometers of range. And I was curious about using it when we stopped, just to see, like, from a time perspective, we wanted to get to Eagle Plains before the tire shop shut down. because we needed someone to open it for us to let us charge, because the Tesla charger on the outside of the building was broken. So if that charger had been working, which we knew it didn't, we knew that we could show up at like 2 a.m, plug in, and then like work out, with the hotel how to pay, because we didn't know how that worked at the time. Like that wouldn't have been an issue at all. But we were racing the clock to get there before the close of business. And so when we stopped, I just plugged in like this, it would really suck to have to like plug this in after we run out of battery and have to sit and wait for like 2 or 3 hours, only to then have to wait like a whole nother day and pay the exorbitant hotel price for another day, solely because I was so, intent on doing 100% on the car's own battery, which again, we technically did because we had 37 kilometers left.
We had way more than the 2 kilometers we got.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, stop.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we couldn't have actually stayed in the hotel another day because
yeah, we didn't know that.
it was overbooked the next day. So there was like people sleeping in the lobby that got there at night and stuff like that, because it was just, for some reason, there was a lot of tourists coming through that day, and there was some iffy weather. So a lot of the people on motorcycles or people who were a bit worried about the road stayed behind. And we boldly forged on in our all-terrain Bolt. I mean, and a lot of things with the battery pack also are like the same reasons we didn't have a generator, right? Too big, too heavy. Hopefully we don't need it. And we didn't need it.
Also, Waste Not, Want Not, Micah literally said, hey, if we run out of power and we've got like 10 kilometers left, I could just jog into town. That we discussed that. So you were correct. If you ran out with a few miles to go, you could have charged or just run into town. Cyprian Sadlin says, what drone do you guys use? I'm having fun following along your journey. Thank you. I'm using the DJI Mini Pro 4. You don't need a license to fly it. You don't need a license to film with it in Canada. You may have noticed there's no filming in the US. That's because I don't have my commercial pilot's license, and Canada allows you to, not that I'm commercializing this trip, but since it could be perceived as a commercial venture, I chose to only fly it in Canada, where a sub 250 gram drone can be used commercially without a license. It got some pretty good video. I'm pretty happy with it.
All right, so Waste Not, Want Not also asks, did you ever see any moosin? Brian Regan reference there. Moosin aren't real.
Yeah, I don't think they're real. I didn't see them. I saw lots of signs for them, but never saw moose.
So, and Hun the Hound again asks, how much have you towed with the Bolt? I saw on my wife's EUV that I can get a 3,000 pound hitch, but I don't know about getting close to that number. I saw people putting airbags in the spring as well to help with towing stability.
Not sure about the 3,000 number. So I use the Eco Trailer hitch, aftermarket hitch, because Chevy doesn't sell one for the regular Bolt. So I believe the EUV does have some towing capacity. That might be a better choice if you want to tow at something. Putting airbags or something in suspension makes a lot of sense. If you ever watch Aging Wheels, he has a whole series where he documents things that affect range in an EV that's towing. And it's not the weight, it's the size of the trailer. And that's why like the Ford F-150 and the Tesla and the Rivian and the Chevy, I don't remember the brand name of the model of the Chevy that he has, but they all have like just massive batteries, like 2 or 3 bolts worth of batteries in some cases, especially if you get the extended range ones, because so much of that power is used to overcome wind resistance. And while I think it would be an absolute riot to do some towing with my Bolt, it'll probably have to be something really small because the car's just not rated for that much towing. Waste Not, Want Not says, are you allowed to go back to Canada after breaking into their government building? And that is in reference to the Yukon Road Transportation garage that we broke into, thinking that it was the welding shop because we were so tired and we couldn't tell the difference.
I mean, I'm Canadian. They have to let me in.
I will find out when I cross the border next time.
And then Waste Not, Want Not also asks, did you ever use the sleeping platform in the Bolt? And there was a couple times where it would have been nice if we had still had. Both of the days we camped, we ended up wishing we still had the sleeping platform because it was cold outside.
Yep. The reason why we didn't keep it, other than what we talked about before, where there was like so much weight and stuff, was even if we did have it, we would have had to unload pretty much the entire car every night. Like I brought an extra tarp and stuff because I knew we'd have to do that, but I just did not expect to be quite as exhausted at the end of the day as I was, and it was like hard enough to just set up a tent. So I would have not wanted to unload a car, and there were many times when we even like when we go to hotel, we would have to like pick up all the camera gear and electronics and like cart it in the hotel because I didn't want to leave it out in the car. And that was like maybe like a fourth of the car that was unloaded, and that took a while. And that was already exhausting enough. So I also want to redesign that platform to make it easier to set up. It was a rush job because I only had about a month to prepare the car for this trip. I'd hope to have more time, but as you can see in a link that I'll share in another interview I had, I did not have this car at my disposal for most of last year to prepare because it had a bad battery that was replaced under warranty. You should click over here and watch the video where we talk more about that.
D says, would you mind sharing your route for people like me to potentially try this out in their EVs?
Sure. I have really good news for anyone who wants to try this route. I will show it here. There's only one road for most of this, so there is really very little to plan for. And because of how remote it is, if you're doing it in an EV, there are only a certain number of chargers that you can use, and you should stop at all of them because if any of them are down, you need enough range to get to the one after that. So we ended up stopping at almost every charger on the Alaska highway, with the exception of I think like one, just because we had so much extra charge it really didn't make sense. In Yukon, we did not check on plug share like we should have and planned a route to a charger that was down. Unfortunately, Brett, the stranger who let us spend the night in his house, when we were messaging him, he reminded us that that charger wasn't active, and so we stopped early and charged before getting to that one. I will say, if you're coming through the Midwest in an EV, there are a couple charging deserts. I like to make sure that I have like a fallback charger to go to, and so we went a slightly longer route up from North Dakota, like Grand Forks. So we drove through Minneapolis, and then we're just outside of Fargo. We drove up to Grand Forks, and then we crossed into Manitoba. It's a little bit faster to cut through more of North Dakota to Minot, and then drive up through Evans, Saskatchewan,
Minot?
and then Minot, yeah, Evans, Saskatchewan, and then Regina. The reason why I didn't choose that is in between the Canadian border and Minot, whatever. It's a really long stretch without any chargers, and we were trying to follow like the charge curve of the Bolt as well, since it charges so slowly. And so we really tried to avoid charging above 80% unless we had to. We would have had to drive to like 20% and then fill up all the way to 100 in order to make it comfortably. Had any one of the stations that we were expecting to charge at been down, that would have made it like we would just had it all tow truck and it would have delayed us a lot. So we went up through Manitoba and then kind of crossed Manitoba into Saskatchewan. On the way back, we did go the charging desert route through Minot. Had no issues, but we were also not trying to make it to the Arctic Ocean on a time budget, so I was okay with us sort of running out of time and getting stuck. But I think we're also a little bit more confident in the car's ability to charge at that point. Even though I just kicked the camera. Even though I own the Bolt, like I had never done a road trip that long, that contiguously before under unpredictable weather, and so I was trying to play it safe going up. And after you drive through snow and on a dirt road and hypermile down to 37 kilometers range, your threshold for what's cutting its close has been shrunk considerably.
Also, we got to put the Manitoba sticker on the car. So that was very important.
And for time reasons, we were, I think, an hour away from Alaska. We could have potentially gotten the Alaska But there was someone charging at the charging station that we needed to get to Alaska, and based on our time budget and everything, we're like, oh, this will cost us like another day and change. I had bought for Micah to fly home, I'd bought him 2 tickets just in case we got delayed. And so he was like, I would like to go home, please. And so we really tried to get him back home in time for the first plane ticket, which we were able to do. We didn't have to fall back to the second.
I mean, the person who is babysitting, watching my kids for me, was leaving like the day after the second ticket. So it was like, I need to get home. So, yeah, because both from Carcross and from Dawson City, we were not that far from Alaska, closer in Carcross, but yeah, neither of them is unthinkably far from Alaska.
Waste Not Want Not wants to know if Micah is available to film any birthday parties. I don't know if that's because he thinks you're a clown or because you're generally entertaining or a good filmographer, which I mocked you for several times. So that is a very open-ended question, and I will let you answer that however you feel.
Like, film birthday parties as in I take video of the birthday party, or film birthday parties as in like, I don't know, film a video saying happy birthday to someone. I mean, I'll do either one. But I live in Guatemala, so you gotta pay my transport costs. And then we have Black Jacques Shellac says, can you please do a video of what sort of adapters for charging you brought with you? I'm under the impression that there are many different 240 volt outlets, and also tips for asking and getting electricity for strangers. We had, in theory, all of the adapters, and then when I was stopped at my cousin's house, we found another adapter, another outlet type that we did not have an adapter for, which Joe brought with him when he flew back up, and we ended up never using. But
no, we used it on the way back.
oh, we did use the other, oh, at my cousin's house.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are quite a few different 240 volt outlet standards. The amperage changes between them. You can get just like a little dumb adapter if you're in the right amperage range to go onto one of the other Tesla charger adapters, because the Tesla charger, the only way to set the amperage it runs at is by changing the plug on it. That would be one thing I would say might be worth getting a different charger on another trip that we can just manually set the amperage on, because that was, fortunately we had the random combination of adapters needed to make it charge at lower amperage, because when we were at the cabins up in Inuvik, the ancient wiring in their old sheds did not really like us drawing the full amperage that circuit was supposedly rated for. So we ended up having to force the car to charge at like 30 amps on a 40 amp circuit. And it would be nice to just be able to select that instead of hoping you have the right combination of adapters. So that's the downside of the Tesla adapter. The upside is it's kind of generally plug and play if you're not dealing with an old barn that was wired in the 60s or something like that you're trying to get it to charge in.
So in the research that I did, the power selectable or the variable amperage chargers were ridiculously expensive, or they still didn't have the adjustability for like all permutations that I needed. Additionally, while I was researching things, I essentially just looked at like what are the dryer outlets and what are the welding outlets that are used by commercial spaces in North America. But in my research, I found that the NEMA 1450, it's a 50 amp charger. It's the most like modern and new, like 4-prong big boy. That will give you most places. Then if there's any old buildings that haven't been updated, then I bought a NEMA 1450 to, I think it's like 1050 or whatever the previous generation was, adapter for like $20 as opposed to like the $80 or whatever that Tesla wanted for another plug for their charger. We just kind of like daisy chained that. Just in case, I had also bought a 1450 to 30 amp plug, NEMA 30 amp, and then we used the 30 amp insert for the Tesla charger onto that. So that's how we tricked the Tesla charger into charging the car at a lower amperage than what the circuit was rated for. through, I think, like 3 different adapters between the wall and the charger. Like, it was pretty crazy.
You only brought those adapters so that we could reuse the same extension cord with multiple plugs.
Yes, that was the other reason I forgot about that.
So,
you want to tell the people after this journey that you became an EV owner?
I bought a literally left in a shed in the middle of rural Guatemala, like 2020 Model 3 Performance that somebody drove down here and parked in a shed and then abandoned there. And then the 12-volt battery died, and then the main battery died, and then the main battery's BMS, just the phantom draw of the BMS, pulled the cell voltage beneath what it'll charge at. So now I get to drop the battery and open it and manually charge the cells, which should be fun.
And you do have experience with DC power, right?
I mean, I've put 450 volts DC 10 amps through my body once before. Why not do it again? No, I actually have the right insulating gloves and stuff like that. Because it wasn't fun. Don't do that. And make sure the isolation switches on equipment that you're working on actually work, and don't just assume they work.
All right, and then I have one last question that I received. What was the experience of the sourtoe cocktail in Dawson City truly like, and does it live up to the hype?
It was good. Honestly, it's a lot grosser in your head than it actually is doing it. The toe is so unrecognizable at this point that like there's not like a visceral like reaction to it. It's all like in your thoughts, because like it could be like a piece of ginger or something, because it's so pickled at this point that like your brain doesn't immediately go, that's a toe, while you're drinking it, right? It's the thinking part of your brain that's grossed out by it, which is an easier part of your brain to silence than like the immediate gut reaction.
So I did not realize that the sourtoe, we were going to the land of the sourtoe until halfway through the trip, and I don't know how I didn't realize this because I researched the heck out of everything else, but I remember watching Andrew Zimmern as a teenager, and on one of his Bizarre Foods episodes, he is in Dawson City and does the sourtoe, and I was like, that's weird. If I were ever in a position to do that, I have to try it because it's just so wild. And so, yeah, I got super excited halfway through the trip. I'm like, wait, this is actually the place that has it. And we were really lucky that we got there before they closed, again, due to the time compressed constraints. So we were able to do it because they don't do it every day of the week either. I think it's like a certain set of days of the week. So we got super lucky to do it. And yeah, I guess it's not an overstatement to say that this was a lifelong dream of mine to be able to do the sourtoe, and so happy to be able to pull it off.
It was actually Joe's plan the whole time to just get there and do the sourtoe. He's pretending he didn't know it was there. That was actually the whole purpose of the trip.
Well, I thought it was in Alaska, not in Yukon.
Smoothest toe-based beverage I've ever drank.
Well, I have one more interview coming up. We can say goodbye to Micah, and we're now going to talk to Sean Roberts, who runs an EV travel website, and spoke about his journey. He drove just a month after we did and had a completely different experience. A far more photogenic experience, I'll be 100% honest. You should definitely not just watch this, but go read his report on his website, which I will link into the description below, because he got some really good fall photos, and we didn't get to experience that, which I'm a little disappointed in. Yeah, well, thanks for doing this with me, Micah. I look forward to doing another adventure with you soon. Anything else you want to leave before we say goodbye?
No, just that. Have a good day, everyone. Have a good year. Peace.